In today's video, we're going to be talking a lot about Starfield. Starfield, as many speculate, is the next AAA RPG coming from Bethesda Game Studios, and a lot of people speculate it'll be announced at this coming E3 on June 10th at Bethesda's conference. Now, to be clear, and I know a lot of you guys already are going to be typing comments down below angrily, I made a video saying I don't think Starfield is Bethesda Game Studios' next game. So this is interesting, and I'm actually going to tell you in this video why I think this means that Starfield isn't necessarily Bethesda Game Studios' next game, and actually likely is not their next game. I gave some reasons in that, and I'm still somewhat convinced that Starfield may not necessarily be Bethesda's next game. I definitely am in the minority here, at least in the minority out of the people I've talked to on this topic. This video is meant to be largely factual. It's putting together all the details so you can come together to form your own opinion on this. Just because I don't believe Starfield's the next game doesn't mean you don't have to either. It seems like, based on the comments of a lot of my recent videos, I actually have to make that distinction. A lot of the stuff I'm talking about in the background is going to be based off a Reddit post from the Bethesda Softworks subreddit, and I'll have a link to that down below. I'm going to be expanding on a number of those topics, as well as including my own observations and just some other things that I felt like was left out of that original post. Either way, I'll have a link to it down below. It's a great subreddit to actually get into some of the discussions on the speculation about these up and coming games. So first and foremost, let me get over the redundant stuff. A lot of people think Starfield is the next game because there was a trademark filed for it many years ago. The original being filed in 2013, and there being subsequent ones, the original for an actual game, while some of the subsequent ones for other things, books, magazines, clothing. That same trademark has been continuously renewed, and I want to point out one thing here. It's actually a trademark filed by ZeniMax. ZeniMax is the parent company of Bethesda Game Studios and Bethesda Softworks. This is a slight point of contention for me. Fallout 4 and many of the subsequent trademarks following Fallout 4 have been filed under Bethesda Softworks, but for whatever reason, Starfield's actually filed under ZeniMax. I found it to be kind of fishy, and it's what led me onto not necessarily believing it's the next game. In addition to that trademark being renewed, some new trademarks have been filed surrounding it. If you don't know, more or less the way trademarks work are you file a trademark for something like a mobile game software, but then you have to file other subsequent trademarks for other things like clothing or toys, whatever it may be. So although the original Starfield trademark for, I believe, the gaming software was filed back in 2013, we've been getting new and subsequent trademarks up until actually just a few months ago. One being filed in December of 2017, and that actually being for some of the different merchandise they will sell, that being mugs, t-shirts, etc. So it's something still very active, at least at ZeniMax, potentially at Bethesda Game Studios also. They do have a lawyer and retainer, so it's important to keep that in mind, but trademarks aren't free. This is a big company, but they're still putting money into this name, or whatever it's going to eventually be, probably a game. Then we have one of the leaks. I take this with a major grain of salt because it's more or less based off somebody who predicted, quote unquote, Fallout 4 being released at 2015's E3. He more or less tweeted in April of 2015 that Fallout 4 will be shown at that E3. E3 takes place in June, so this was a month or two before its actual announcement, and how did he know that? You could definitely argue it's just a guess. I would actually say it was probably just a guess, and unlikely that he actually had insider information. But in addition, later on June 20th of 2015, so a few months after the first tweet, he did tweet that Bethesda has a new IP in development, release late 2017, space combat and planet exploration, not playable yet, it's an action RPG. So now it's going to take us back to 2017's E3. A lot of people speculate that since there was a space theme going on in the background, and there really wasn't all that much as far as space games being revealed, Bethesda initially planned to announce Starfield at this E3, but at the last minute changed their mind, and that's why there's a space theme, and all around the conference as a whole in 2017 was pretty lackluster. Many speculate this is because they were planning on there being another big announcement in that new game, but when they cut that, they didn't really have something to fill the gap. So I personally don't really believe either of these. I don't think predicting Fallout 4 to be announced at an E3 is super big. A lot of people argue that nobody was really talking about it at that time, but again, Fallout 4 was coming. I'm sure many people knew that or expected that, and I wouldn't put too much stock into that guy's predictions. Same thing with the E3 presentation. Bethesda is a massive company. Unless they're just really lazy, I imagine they had the budget and the staff to change the slides for that E3 if they really wanted to. But again, that's just me giving my opinion, and I'm trying to establish all the facts first, and then giving my own interpretation after the fact, so you could hopefully form your own opinion in addition. The next, I guess, segment in this video is actually going to talk about some of Bethesda's older stuff, and there's a reason for that. In a recent interview, Todd Howard said that when he was first getting into Bethesda, and actually just before getting into Fallout 3, as studio director, he made a list of games he wanted to make at some point.
We made a list when we were back doing the Elder Scrolls Online, right before we got Fallout. And we getting a lot of pressure. Not pressure, we wanted to. Like, we're going to do something else. Let's make the list of here are the things that we would like to do one day. And Fallout, post-apocalyptic was at the top of it. But there's other things in that list. That's what I would say. Where some of those we're investigating. That we'd like to try some new things. Though we love the worlds of Elder Scrolls and Fallout as well. They're ones that we're not going to leave behind.
Post-Apocalyptic was on that list, and Post-Apocalyptic was subsequently filled by Fallout 3. But now that they are moving to new IPs, which they have also confirmed that they're working on 2 new IPs before the Elder Scrolls 6 does come out, taking that all into consideration, he referenced that he's going back to that original list that he made all those years ago. With that in mind, we actually look at some of the things Bethesda was previously working on or canceled projects, things like that. Some concepts that Todd Howard wanted to take on, but never actually got to, so now he may be returning to. Well, one such thing is actually a Star Trek RPG. Todd Howard and Bethesda Softworks actually pitched this as a game, and obviously it never got made. They had the rights to Star Trek and actually published a few other Star Trek games, but nothing was developed internally by Bethesda Game Studios or Todd Howard. And I guess I actually probably have to make this distinction for some people, but if you don't know, Star Trek is actually a space-based TV show, movies, things like that. I imagine some younger people watching this may have never actually heard of Star Trek or just not know what it is. Then we also do have the 10th Planet. This was a game that was a concept or work in progress by Bethesda Softworks as well as Centropolis Productions. This is something they would have been working on in the mid to late 90s, and it's just another one that never actually got made, but a space combat sim as well as a Star Trek game, which of course would have had some space elements in it, or at least have a setting taking place in space. Then we have one that's actually pretty interesting. So it's going to be called Backspace, or at least that was the internal design name given to this, and it's described as a sci-fi Skyrim, something taking place in space and being created by Obsidian. So if you don't know, Obsidian is the developer behind Fallout New Vegas. They were contracted by Bethesda or ZeniMax to actually make that game, so the two worked fairly close. There's a small internal team at Obsidian following the release of Fallout New Vegas that came out in 2010. This was done in 2011, and the small team was trying to create, I guess largely probably some concept or some pre-production stuff around a sci-fi Skyrim known as Backspace. So there's an article published about this, and they actually reached out to the CEO of Obsidian. One thing he said here is that the project was never greenlit or canceled, so it was more like it was actually shelved, maybe something they'd come back to later on. It's not entirely clear how clear of a role Todd Howard played in this concept, but the article does confirm that there was a connection between Obsidian and Bethesda Game Studios because they were using the creation engine, that's what Skyrim's based off of, as well as Fallout 4. So although this was technically an Obsidian game, it seems like Bethesda would have had somewhat of a role in its development. So to recap, more or less, Todd Howard made a list of games he wants to make or concepts for games he wants to make. We've seen now on 3 iterations when he may have had some attempt at making a space game but never actually went through. That coupled with the idea that there's a Starfield trademark and some other evidence make it seem very likely that Starfield may be the next game from Bethesda Game Studios, being an open world space RPG. Now that's all very promising, but why this E3? Well, first and foremost, Fallout 4 is pretty old at this point. Fallout 4 will be 3 years old this November, and a lot of people have moved on from that game. It seems like a great release window for a new game from Bethesda Game Studios. In addition to that, a lot of announcements have been coming out of Bethesda. If you don't know, the Bethesda E3 conference is actually Bethesda Softworks, the publishing company. Bethesda Game Studios is solely the dev behind Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, while Bethesda Softworks makes Wolfenstein, Doom, etc. Well, a lot of lesser releases that many people predicted to get announced at E3, things like ports of various games to the Nintendo Switch, as well as DLCs for various games, are actually getting announced before the E3 conference. I actually made a video about a month ago now where I predicted many of these things to get announced at E3, and then in the following weeks they all got announced now. This is very interesting because it's seemingly clearing out space at E3 for something else, or hopefully something bigger to get announced. At 2017's E3, we got a lot of DLC, we got a lot of these more minor game announcements. Well, now in 2018, it seems like a lot of those are not going to be announced at E3 because they're already announced. And then finally, another big one is in that same interview with Todd Howard that took place a few weeks ago, he did mention or made an analogy as to how he's kind of wrapping up a game right now.
Show people that, you know what, our problems don't really change.
Or I have to remind myself. It's like you forget.
Yeah.
You know, if you move, you haven't moved in a while. Moving is terrible. Packing and moving or having a child, not terrible, but the pressures of it and the, you know, that those are you forget how hard it is to finish a game.
He compared it to moving a new house, and more or less the analogy he made, or that people are interpreting it as, is he's wrapping up a game and he hasn't wrapped up a game in quite a few years because many of these games have 5-year development cycles. And now that he's wrapping it up, it's kind of weird to actually move on from that thing onto something new. So that's pretty much everything. I mean, I invariably miss something as life goes. So if I did miss something obvious, comment it down below. But otherwise, those are all the things going on over the past few months that a lot of people think is pointing towards a Starfield reveal. I again personally don't think Starfield is the next game. I think way too much of this evidence is either based off of selection bias, and a lot of it's just going off of that Starfield trademark. I think there will be a new game, I just don't think it's Starfield in particular. But I figured I'd make this video, lay everything out, so hopefully you too can come to your own opinions and conclusions. So that's pretty much it, but on the last iteration of these far more personal outros, people said, push it back, so okay. So how's that? That's way farther back. We could zoom in, but either way, I could crop it. Alright, that's probably good. But today we do have a non-psych fun fact. We actually have an economics fun fact of the day. So this is pretty interesting. I actually only just learned this in a class, and more or less what it says is, it's a recent study that was published that found depending on the area or whatever the political ideology of an area you grew up in. So like, let's say you grew up in an area and you may not be liberal, but a lot of people are liberal. Depending on whether it's liberal or conservative, you will have differences in the likelihood of you getting married. So some of this was up to a 10% swing depending on like how liberal or conservative that area was. But somewhere like New York City, where it is extremely liberal, you had a 10% less likelihood than the population to get married. So highly liberal areas led to people getting married less often, and highly conservative areas led to people getting married more often. This is not just a case of staying in that area. Even if you grew up in New York City and then moved into Texas or something, the fact that you grew up in a liberal area, even if you yourself were not liberal, that predisposes you to be 10% less likely to get married as a result. It was something just super interesting. Again, sounds like fun fact, but it's something I learned and I figure I'd share it with you. Either way, as always, I thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.